Hey everyone, and welcome to the Anso studio. Today I'm going to talk about the most important Anso factory designs. I've been a knife maker and knife designer for the past 35 years. Yep, that's right. How old are you?
I'm 34.
Yes. So I made the first knife in 1989. I went full-time making knives and designing knives in 2001. My formal education is as an industrial designer. I've never had a real job as a designer, except for the past 24 years. I've worked as a professional designer here in Anso, Denmark. I've always enjoyed designing knives. I've enjoyed designing objects that I could hold in my hand, probably somewhat biased from my knife making experience. Very early on in my career as a knife maker, I had this strong drive towards designing for companies, with the little note that it shouldn't be my main focus. I've always considered myself a knife maker first and foremost, and then a knife designer. And because of that, a lot of what you'll see here today is design that's based off a custom version. Not all of them, but most of them are based on custom designs that I've made myself. In 2006 or 7, I had just come back from Blade Show in Atlanta, and an email landed in my inbox. The email is from Sal Glasser, who is the founder and president of Spyderco, and he showed an interest in my design that I call the Rock Lobster. For him to show interest in my design was just a dream come true, because at that point I had a huge fascination of Spyderco knives. There's something unique about their way into designing a knife, where one of the significant features is the round opening hole, which is a Spyderco trademark. At that point I had designed and made knives with the Spyderco hole under a trade license given by Spyderco to me. So I was allowed to make custom knives with the Spyderco hole. That's, in my book, really important, that if you're seeking to use something that is a trademark, or even just a trademark in quotation mark, that it's not copyrighted, but it's something that one maker is known to use, then you ask before using it. Then you seek permission, or you do something completely different. With the Spyderco hole, it was very natural for me to reach out to Spyderco and say, I would really love to build knives using the Spyderco hole. Is that possible? And I received the contract free of charge. Didn't cost me other than the stamp for the return envelope. That allowed me to make 50 custom knives per year with the Spyderco hole. So for a good number of years, and I still do it to this day, I made a lot of knives with Spyderco hole. And of course, makers who use the Spyderco hole in the custom knives will get Spyderco's attention at some point, and I did. And this turned out to be my first factory knife that went into production. This is a pre-production prototype that Spyderco sent to me. So I would like to say that this is probably the most important knife that I have in my collection, except I know that I will say something similar later on, or maybe in another episode. But at least this is a very important knife in my collection because of the history and what it started. I believe that the second design that was put out was the Spyderco Sulu. And I believe one of the reasons why Spyderco really liked this one was because of the name, or at least the name made them pay more attention. I put an ad in Blade magazine and in the Blade Show program right before Blade Show in 2010 maybe. And it had my custom version of the Sulu, and this is Spyderco's version of it. Incidentally, this was, I believe, the first time I saw texture like this on a factory knife. This is what has become known as the Anso texture. Back in 2004-05, I started adding texture to my knife handles. I wasn't the first to do that for sure, but I believe that I was one of the makers who perfected, if I can say that about my own work, I perfected this type of texture, and now today it's acknowledged as an Anso texture. Reason why I'm not 100% sure if this was the first or if this was the first is that they're right around the same time. At least, as far as I recall, this was the second company that I started designing for. This is Fox in Italy, in Maniago, and this is the FX302, which is another design using the Anso texture here on titanium, which I thought was, and think to this day, it was really, really cool. The texture has this unique capability that it gives a super good grip, it looks cool, and it looks somewhat organic. Especially back then, most all my knives had some kind of an organic feel to it. Especially these two are really, really good examples of the very, very curvy designs that I was also known for a period of time. I think it's very common for painters to have a blue period or red period or a yellow period. I had a very curvy period for my designs and everything was out there. And I think what that did for me was it helped me put me on the map as a custom maker and as a knife designer, because what I was designing was very different from what most other people was designing. Did it hit everybody's taste? No, not at all. And I think it would be a stretch to say that I might have met 10% of the market, but I was actually really okay with that. I have this philosophy that I would rather have 10% love my design and 90% hate my design than having a broader range of people just being meh. I would rather provoke some kind of reaction to my designs than having people be indifferent. So that was one of the reasons why I picked this kind of design language. Straight next to this design that is also a Spyderco design. This was actually designed very specifically for non-knife friendly countries. Is that a word? Is that even a sentence?
Probably.
So it was designed for people living in countries with very strict knife laws, like Denmark, for instance. We have always been known to have super strict knife laws. So at a meeting with Sal Glesser at the EVA show in Nuremberg, I was walking around with my good friend Jesper Voxnes, and we talked with Sal Glesser, and he asked us to design a knife for the Danish knife market, as well as the British, the German, but especially Denmark was on his radar. It's not a huge market, but if it would fly in Denmark, it would fly everywhere. So Jesper and myself designed the Spyderco Pingo, and it looks a little odd because it has this small hole that's not really an opening hole, because one-hand open knives were strictly illegal in Denmark at this point. But Spyderco's trademark dictates that they put a round hole in the blade, so that is the reasoning for this small hole. Incidentally, the Pingo was the first project Jesper and myself designed together, and that led to this one. It took a few years before we reached this far. This is the GMP1. This is Giant Mouse Knives' first design that came out. And the GM1, or the GMP1 in this case, was the lead-in for us to build Giant Mouse that has now grown into a rather large company. And that makes the GMP1 super important. We just came out with the GM11, which I think is one of the coolest production knives out there right now. I really, really like how this came out. I love the very utilitarian design here. The blade shape is, in my opinion, just perfect user, everyday carry knife. I understand that for the somewhat higher priced production knives, some of these won't see use. And I feel that's a pity because this is a great user. I love how the bronze inlay here and the bronze spacer gives it some accents. But this is just, in my opinion, very close to the perfect everyday carry knife. It has enough size to be capable of doing just about everything, but still, it's a relatively compact package. This leads me to another, for me, super important design, more so because of the story that I'm gonna tell you than the design itself. This is the Giant Mouse Clyde, but if you see here, it's not just the Giant Mouse Clyde. This is actually a prototype that we decided to make, and I milled this scale in my shop on my CNC with the Thaysen logo, because between Jim, Jesper, and myself, the three founding members in Giant Mouse, we all have a huge fascination for Thaysen. I love my Thaysen messenger bag. I've carried this all around the world and I seldomly leave the house without it. So having a project with Thaysen would be something that we would be super interested in. So we went ahead, before even asking if they would be interested in doing a project with us, we went ahead and made a few of these prototypes here. And what do you know? A few years later, I don't recall exactly the distance in time, but 2 years ago we made a project with Thaysen and did pop-up shows all over the US in all the Thaysen stores, which I was lucky enough to take part of, and that was so much fun. So this is a really important design. I decided at some point that I really wanted to be a designer for Zero Tolerance and Kershaw knives. In order to do that, that meant I had to design a ton of knives and show them to Zero Tolerance and Kershaw. I remember very specifically the first meeting with them, they had absolutely no interest, or at least they showed absolutely no interest. I think when you're a very popular company, there's a lot of makers and designers who want to design for you, and if you don't scare at least some of them away, you can't do nothing else but look at design drawings every single day. So at every single knife show that I would attend, where Zero Tolerance would attend, I would arrange a meeting, sit down, show them 5 new designs that I'd made, listen to their feedback, return 6 months later with another 5-6 designs. And that was a process that took me 5 years. It took me 5 years of going to meetings with them, listening to feedback, until I finally got it, or they finally got so tired of me that said, well, let's give him a contract and make him shut up. Except I didn't shut up. Incidentally, when I did sign that first contract, it was with this pen, which was an anniversary present from my wife. It's a cross pen. So after signing the contract, I went out and bought myself my first Rolex, which was the price that I would give myself when I signed that contract. That it took me 5 years to finally land that contract, I didn't really know that, but I waited and I'm super happy about that. Anyways, the design turned out to be the CT0220, which is a solid big knife. Just listen to this sound here. Even though it's a somewhat large knife, it's fast and it's heavy and this packs a punch. I was lucky enough to actually visit the factory a couple of times, and in one of those visits I assembled one for myself, hand signed it. So this one is really one of the most important knives in the collection because this is a Anso assembled 0220, which I'm really happy about. This leads straight to a design I did for Kershaw. Zero Tolerance and Kershaw are under the same roof, so to speak. It's not the same company, but they are owned by the same people. So Zero Tolerance is a lower quantity, higher quality, and whereas Kershaw is a little more budget friendly. So I went ahead and designed the Fraction, which incidentally is my most popular design out there if you judge it by the amount of sold items. And one of the reasons why it became that was that this design was chosen to be displayed in Walmart, which for some people doesn't sound like much, but for a knife designer, knowing that very few knives get selected to be in Walmart. For Kershaw's point of view here, it was a matter of 10 different knife models that was picked to be in Walmart. And usually one knife is in Walmart for 1 year. The Fraction was in Walmart for 2 years. So this son sold a ton of knives, but it's a $25 knife, so it's also budget friendly. Incidentally, I actually have one of the first, if not the first prototype for the Fraction. It's a little different sized and compared to the final design, but you can definitely see where the design came from. Even the texture in the handle came right in the custom knife. As I mentioned before, not all my designs have been made as a custom knife. Some have been made as prototypes, some have been made as 3D printed prototypes, and some have never seen anything but paper in my shop. But here's an example of one of the knives that actually saw a few prototypes. I think I made 3 custom knives of the prototype that I called the Blitz. Naming knives is one of the most difficult parts of what I do. Coming up with a name that is not overly used, and I say that because it's very hard to find very unique names that has never been used in the knife community. I think I've succeeded most of the time, but if somebody out there named their knife something like I did, I don't pay too much attention on that, except I do like to come out with something that is unique and original and all that. And it doesn't matter that much in the custom knife scene, but in the production knife scene, it means a ton that there's no matching names between 2 companies on a knife model. So the companies out there spend tons of time. And I recall having to name this one, and I believe it was Kershaw that came up with the name in the end after saying no to something like 30 or 40 name suggestions that I came up with because the legal department just searched and ooh, there was a knife company in 1982 that named a knife like that. We can't do that, just to avoid lawsuits and all that. So this one has a special place with me.
How was the call when they told you that you were going to be in Walmart with one of your designs?
Well, I would say it was probably an email, and maybe I didn't learn about it until it was actually there. But I can tell you one thing, and my reaction was yes. Because as a designer, of course, you're interested in selling a ton of knives. And knowing that Walmart has, I believe it's 4,032 stores across the US, you can just start adding numbers, counting on your fingers. If each store needs a handful or a box of knives, that mounts up to a lot of sold knives. So that is, as a designer, a super important market to get into. As a high-end custom knife maker, having sold knives in Walmart can be a little strange, but I consider myself also a professional designer, and because of that, I love to see the span of knives and see that the same designer can design a knife that is being retailed for $25 or being retailed for $500, both for production knives. And now move into custom knives. Well, I make knives very frequently in the $4,000 or $5,000 range and even $15,000 range, and really there's no upper limit. It just depends on the client and what we agreed to build. One of the aspects about factory designs is, as I see it, as well, this might sound wrong, but it's kind of a gateway drug for the custom knives, or it's a ladder towards the custom knives. If you're interested in my designs, this is a way in. I know it's not a lot of people who can afford to go out and pay $1,500 for a custom knife, but they might be able to afford $100 for a similar design. So I definitely see designing for companies as a way in for people for my designs. I also see it as part of my income stream, if you will. I run my company and I design for other companies. It all comes together. We're now moving on to a different company. In this case, it's Boker in Solingen. Solingen is one of the knife maker capitals of the world. We have a bunch around the world. We have Maniago in Italy. We have Sheffield in Great Britain. We have Portland, I guess. That's where companies like Zero Tolerance and a few others persist. We have Seki City in Japan, and we have Solingen in Germany. Boker was one of the very early companies that I started working with. And one of the very fun memories of working with Boker was driving to Solingen from the headquarters here in Denmark in my first Land Rover, a 1985 Defender. The Defender would top out at around 100 kilometers per hour, whatever that is in miles, I have no idea. 60, thank you so much. That trip would take something like 11 hours in that very old car. And I could hardly walk when I stepped out of the car either. It's not very comfortable. But we did a number of designs with Boker. And one of them that I really enjoy is the haddock. The haddock is one of my favorite designs. The haddock is one of my favorite designs. So here's the custom version, and here's a relatively new version from Boker. That turned out to be a very long friendship, and we've designed and made knives for a good number of years. The haddock is actually inspired by something that probably wouldn't make sense to most of you viewers here, but I grew up on a kids show in television called Emil fra Lønneberg, and it was about a very energetic boy. He was probably 7 years old, who got sent to the woodshed to carve figures in order to not get beat up by his dad.
Så mycket pälsmet! Oj.
Och hjälp! Emil!
Nej, Emil! Fort ut i snickerboa med dig!
Förgrämmad unge! Vänta bara du!
The 70s were great. And at some point I designed the haddock, and it very closely resembles the knife that Emil uses in the TV show to carve these figures. I believe that the knife he used in the TV show was a kitchen knife where they broke the tip off so he wouldn't poke himself in the belly or something. But I designed the haddock with inspiration from that and from sailors' knives from years ago. Back in the day, they would break the tip off sailors' pocket knives so they wouldn't be tempted to commit mutiny and stab each other when they got drunk in all the rum they were drinking.
For real?
Yeah. So having a knife when you're on the sea that wouldn't risk poking you if you fell on the deck made a lot of sense. Incidentally, the haddock just turned out to be a great user knife, and being a two-handed open knife allowed it to be used in countries like Germany, where there's a very strict law against one-hand open knives. You're allowed to own them, but you can't carry them in public. You couldn't carry them in public in Denmark either. Now you can't carry anything unless it's part of hunting or fishing or something else. But at least now they allow one-hand open knives in Denmark. But the haddock is probably one of my favorite custom designs, and it turned out to be a great factory design as well. Incidentally, this is a limited version for the German market put out by my good friend Maxi. Really, really cool version. So here's actually to me really, really interesting project because of the order that it was made in. At some point at Blade Show, I was talking with Giovanni from Viper Knives, and he really, really wanted to make a project with me. So I designed the Orso for Viper Knives. I love this knife. It's so well built. Viper is just such a skilled manufacturer. That's one thing that I have really been focusing on when picking companies to do design work for. I've always focused on picking companies who are known to do really, really good work. And Viper is definitely among them. The interesting fact about the Orso is that this is not a design that started out as a custom. This is my custom version of the Orso, but it's actually the other way around. I designed the Orso for Viper, and then I made the custom Orso myself, and it was in that order, which was kind of unusual, especially if you see a project like this. This is the Gotcha by MKM. It originated as the Neo. This is my custom Neo. I designed this, I'd like to say, in 2018, and MKM later made this. For whatever reason, they didn't want to call it the Neo, so they picked very, very easy to pronounce Gotcha. This is one of the cases where the custom folder preceded the production version, and if you look, it's so close. They really stayed true to the design here. Even though they picked a bent clip, they stayed with the design of the original clip. That I really, really enjoy that. Speaking of Maniaco, where the companies MKM and Viper resides out of, is also Fox that we mentioned with this one. And here is the Anso Sero. You can see the version here. This is an unfinished project that I'm preparing for the New York Custom Show here. You can definitely see the difference in size, but you can definitely also see resemblance, even though it's somewhat different with no opening hole. Incidentally, this one has serrations on it, which the knife itself was a gift, and the serration was made by Bob Tassola, which Berthelsen Hole is the grand old man of custom knives, so having a knife that he modified, I thought that was pretty cool. Fox just came out with a new version of the Sero at this year's EVA show, and you should definitely look that up because I think we came out with something really, really cool. It's a new blade shape on the same handle, and we added opening holes and some bells and whistles. You should definitely check that out. The last project that I wanted to talk about now is again a zero tolerance project, and it's based on my Monte Carlo. So this is my Monte Carlo design. This is a custom Monte Carlo, the version 1. I still don't have a version 2 of the Monte Carlo, but I'm working on that as well. The Monte Carlo is the most popular custom knife that I've designed and made if you look at sold numbers. I believe I've built more than 700 custom Monte Carlos so far. Whoa. Let me backtrack a little bit. In order to make one-hand opened folding knives in Denmark, which is something that I've been doing since the early 2000s, I needed permits from the Danish Justice Department and the police. I needed permits all over the place. And I got all those permits. It was a lot of paperwork and a lot of bureaucracy, but having those permits allowed me to build one-hand open knives. Apparently this is a weapon of mass destruction when it comes to the Danish government, at least back then. Now, fast forward to maybe 10 years ago, I got a call from the local police station saying that I can see that you sent in an application to renew your permits to make one-hand open knives. And I'm sorry to say, but I can't allow that to happen.
What?
Whatever you're doing is strictly illegal and you should stop altogether. And if you don't, a lot of bad things will happen to you. And I was like, oh my God. So I started complaining and I went up and up in the system and I hired a lawyer and I started considering if I should open up a big case in the EU for hindering a business in producing a product when everybody else in the EU could do that, but we never got that far. But in the meantime, I was completely stressed out because it was my livelihood that was at stake here. What I did do was I designed the Monte Carlo, which at that point fitted right into the Danish knife law or weapons law. You could easily carry a under 7 centimeters and two-handed open knife. You could carry that freely everywhere. So I designed the Monte Carlo, and I had absolutely no clue that the Monte Carlo would become so popular all over the world, because apparently there's very strict knife regulations in some of the major cities, even in the US. But also it turned out to be a sought after design because it's somewhat traditional, but with a very untraditional look or design to it. It had some features. It's a slip joint, except it's not a traditional slip joint. It works with a double detent mechanism that holds it open and closed, but I incorporated a half stop, which is very traditional for slip joints in the old days. That turned out to just be a massive success, and even to this day I produce quite a few Monte Carlos. Then fast forward to zero tolerance, making the 0230, which is pretty much a one-to-one version of the Monte Carlo. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Remember that the order book for the Aros is open. If you want to support this channel and help keep the light on, I suggest you take a look at the Aros. This is a very, very cool and perhaps the best everyday carry folder out there. Until next time, see you later.